Hi folks, and welcome to another episode in a video series presented by KupoCon, where I'll be exploring the Final Fantasy VII compilation lore and Easter eggs that appear in the remake. I'm MJ Gallagher, author of the unofficial Final Fantasy VII Novelisation, the standalone novel The Nibelheim Incident, which is now an audio series also produced by KupoCon, and the forthcoming book Norse Myths that inspired Final Fantasy VII. The purpose of this series is to discuss a lot of the detail hidden within the remake, and to provide a broader understanding for new and veteran fans alike. In the last episode, I covered the opening segment to Chapter 9, titled The Town That Never Sleeps, covering the backstories to Wallmarket and the Sector 6 plate, the creeps lurking in the collapsed expressway, and Cloud and Aerith's deepening bond, among other things. This time around, I'll be providing a proper introduction to Wallmarket, an entertainment district and pleasure capital of Midgar. The video will inherently include spoilers for this section of the game, but anything beyond Chapter 9 is minimal and mainly speculation. However, as always, if you're not familiar with the original story, there will very likely be heavy spoilers. With Tifa bound for Don Corneo's mansion, Aerith convinces Cloud that they must go after her, because she's familiar with how dangerous the slums' mafia boss actually is, especially to females. Cloud agrees, and the two eventually arrive at the southern entrance to Wallmarket, where they begin asking questions at the Chocobo stables. This appears to be the hub of Sam's delivery service, a transportation company whose name is perhaps a callback to the Strife delivery service, Cloud's courier business in Advent Children. After their exchange with the stable hand, Chocobo Sam emerges from the shack. Sam is one of the trio that assists Don Corneo in his hunt for a new bride, and the answers to his questions will affect which side quests are later made available to the player, similar to the gold saucer dating mechanics of the original game. It may just be a coincidence, but Sam's outfit bears a strange resemblance to the one Tifa wore during the Nibelheim incident, with the brown cowboy hat, waistcoat, belt and boots over a white shirt. He advises Cloud and Aerith that Tifa has been selected as a candidate to be the next Mrs. Corneo, and they are unlikely to see her again for a while. This prompts them to start looking in Wallmarket for clues on how to help her. As the pair enter the district, the camera pans up to show the overhead sign which reads South. The same sign was visible in the old game, and its purpose was unclear because there was no directional equivalent. Now, however, there's also an east entrance to Wallmarket, which leads directly to Sector 5, bypassing the collapsed expressway. The corresponding east sign seems to have fallen down though, perhaps as an homage to the original. There's a lot going on in Wallmarket, and it's very easy to miss some of the awesome little details that developers have slipped in. While I did spot a few more random references, I'm just going to point out some of the cooler ones. First of all, at the Big and Juicy barbecue stall, there's a customer who has purchased an enormous sandwich with some mystery meat in it. Based on the eyes alone, I would hazard a guess that this is a Marlborough Tentacle, which is quite a clever joke. During the old game, the player could steal an item from the Marlboroughs on Gaia's Cliff, called M Tentacles, which was of course short for Marlborough Tentacles. Using this item casts Bio 3 on all enemies, so the joke might be that consuming the meat would make you sick, just like the poor customers of the restaurant in a later side quest. The stall's menu also lists the Ultima Monster Burger and Omega Fries. Now, Ultima and Omega have been recurring terms in the Final Fantasy series, dating back to Final Fantasies II and V respectively. Since Final Fantasy VI, however, the names have been more closely associated with the Ultima and Omega weapons, typically super bosses, which are automatons or biomechanical monsters. What's caused confusion over the years for Final Fantasy VII fans is that the colossal fiend one would expect to call the Ultima weapon is actually the ultimate weapon, while the Ultima weapon is Cloud's strongest sword. The compilation finally got its own Omega weapon in Dirge of Cerberus, acting as a vessel for the livestream should the planet come close to dying. I'm interested to see how the future installments of the remake handle the existence of these beings. At another stall, there's a man selling potion drinks. Various potion types have appeared throughout the franchise as healing items, but I suspect this is actually a reference to the limited edition range of soft drinks Square Enix released in celebration of the Final Fantasy VII's 10th anniversary, themselves branded as potions. Opposite the potions juice stall, you can see a large white Lucky Cat doll outside the pharmacy, known as the Mineki Niko in Japanese. The exact same figurine appears in the corresponding spot in the original game and has a young boy admiring it. And speaking of returning features, attempting to access the terminal in the item shack will cause the chain gun to fire at you, just as it did before. Veteran fans may recall that revisiting the terminal towards the end of Final Fantasy VII will grant you Tifa's ultimate weapon, the Premium Heart. There are several advertisements throughout Wall Market for Don Corneo's Circus of Awe, and these tend to be accompanied by artwork for a large beast. While the gorilla-like brute appears to be quite generic, the concept of the circus helps to explain how the mobster is able to keep so many monstrous creatures as pets. There's a secret boss at the Colosseum that arguably falls into this category, but I won't name it now just for the sake of minor spoilers. And then there are apps and raps from the original game, the former of whom, retranslated as Abzu, shows up in the next chapter. As you wander around Midgar in the remake, there may be occasions where you hear a voice that sounds pretty familiar. And you'd be right. Square Enix quite often employ actors they've worked with before to help cover smaller parts. A prime example of this is the Tavern Barker in Wall Market, performed by none other than Ray Chase, the voice of Noctis in Final Fantasy XV's English localization. And if you listen carefully enough, you may find a number of Ray's other minor characters around the district. A short way from the tavern is a vendor selling materia popsicles. One of the customers comments that her favourite flavour is Chocobo and Moogle chocolate. In isolation, this may not mean much, but it's part of a wider Easter egg. If you explore the lanes around the Honeybee Inn, you'll encounter an older man making demands of a female. It turns out he wants the candy from her summon materia ice cream, specifically the Alexander item, and is willing to trade 3 Bahamutes to get it. In the original game, the player is rewarded with the Alexander materia for defeating the Snow Lady on the Great Glacier, so the ice cream connection becomes apparent. While both the Bahamut and the Chocobo and Moogle materias can be obtained in the remake, Alexander cannot, which suggests that we can look forward to it in a future instalment. The bar towards the western part of Wall Market is called Drunkards, and is probably most recognisable to veteran fans as the place where Cloud and Aerith can enlist the help of the clothes shop owner, which I'll discuss a bit more next time, as well as the guy having some difficulties in the toilet. Another little tidbit is that, based on the design of its interior, the bar is very likely the one that appears in episode 22 of Before Crisis. What's interesting about this is that Elena works there as a barmaid while studying at the Shinra Academy, prior to being recruited by the Turks. I spoke in the last episode about how it's no secret to the people of the slums that Don Cornell is obsessed with Wutai culture, and the decor of Wall Market reflects this. Like the Far Eastern influence on Wutai's design in Final Fantasy VII, this district very much has a Chinatown vibe to it, with the illuminated lanterns and traditional Eastern dishes that can be found in the diners. The statues at the entrance to the Cornell Coliseum are another example of this. On the right is a Chinese dragon, while on the left is an Imperial warrior engaging the beast in battle. The style of the combatant resembles the figures present in the monolithic Dachau sculpture carved into the mountain above Wutai's capital, particularly his facial features and outstretched arm. Dachau is the primary deity of the Wusheng, either as a single god or in multiple manifestations. The Leviathan is also worshipped, albeit as a mighty serpent that can be summoned to protect Wutai. Like Chinese dragons, Leviathan is heavily associated with the element of water, so the sculptures at the Colosseum may be some sort of representation of Leviathan battling with an avatar of Dachau. It's also probably worth noting that the only time the player encounters Don Cornell outside Midgar in the original Final Fantasy VII is at the Dachau sculpture in Wutai. Opposite the Colosseum is a scrap heap and entrance to the weapons store. Fans may remember this as being the place where Cloud, Tifa and Barret had to come to buy the 3 batteries that would help them ascend the wreckage of the train tunnels following the collapse of Sector 7. If you look closely, you can see these same 3 batteries dangling on a wire above the scrap. Inside the store, there's a weapons vendor at the back, who is the brother of the man lying on a tank at the other side of the junk pile. Like his sibling, he comments on how wonderful it would be to own one of the Shinra's Relnica ships. This sounds suspiciously close to Gelnica, the model of the hydroplane fleet based at Junin Airport, but it's not a term that has been used before. It's unclear if the Relnica is a marine vessel or an airship, but I'm sure we'll find out in part 2 of the remake. If you watched the previous episode in this series, you may have noticed that towards the end of the video, I had Cloud pause on the road to Wall Market beside an advertisement for a stamp production. I wanted to wait until now to discuss this in detail, because a much larger billboard is found at the heart of the district. The production is called Stamp and the Hidden Treasure, and from the accompanying text that reads, "Now showing," I suspect it's a movie in cinemas. If you look closely at the poster, it depicts Stamp riding a camel, positioned in front of a pyramid topped by mystical spheres of light and a star constellation. The image gives an Arabian vibe, like the stories of Aladdin or Ali Baba, but the pyramid is intriguing because it immediately evokes parallels to the Temple of the Ancients. Now, just to be clear, this structure seems to be based on Egyptian pyramids, while the original game's Temple of the Ancients was Mesoamerican in design. As we know from certain dialogue in the remake, and comments made by creators during interviews in its Ultimania, Stamp isn't just a mascot. He symbolises something else, something that has yet to be fully revealed. So, what could the purpose of this advertisement be? Well, as I've mentioned in previous episodes, I have a theory that Stamp represents Cloud's story arc, or the multiple aspects of his character, or both. This is 100% speculation, but I don't think it's a coincidence that a poster displaying what could be interpreted as the Temple of the Ancients and the cosmological power of the Black Materia, itself a so-called hidden treasure, appears in the same chapter as Cloud supposedly having a vision of Aerith in the Sleeping Forest, a scene which occurs immediately after he escapes the temple and hands Sephiroth the Black Materia in the old game. If this is true, we now have a version of Stamp which signifies an event in Cloud's future. This complements the Stamp artwork reflecting Cloud's present, such as those found in the railway tunnels of Chapter 5, and also his past, in, for example, the billboards encouraging young men to join the Shinra security division. As for my full theory on the subject though, I'll likely come back to that in Chapter 10. Lurking in the corner of the main marketplace is Chadley, the young intern of Shinra's Research and Development Division. As in Chapter 8, he offers Cloud the opportunity to test his portable combat simulator, this time to obtain the Fat Chocobo materia. The data on the creature describes it as a spirit often associated with fertility and harvests. This reflects the real world, where the hatching of chicks often represents springtime. Further to this, the enemy intel refers to the summon as a manifestation of the legendary Chocobo, one that appears in many beloved fairy tales. Those tales are a likely reference to the Final Fantasy franchise itself, where the Fat Chocobos made their first appearance in Final Fantasy III, and were used by the player to store items or to provide other functions. As I mentioned in the bonus section of Episode 6 in this series, the Fat Chocobo could also be summoned into battle in the original game, but only had a 1 in 16 chance of occurring when the player used the Chocomog materia. I'd like to go off at a tangent for a minute and speak about a scene I mistakenly thought would also play out here, but actually seems exclusive to Chapter 8. If you wait until Aerith has rejoined the party before engaging with Chadley in Sector 5, his dialogue will be different. He welcomes Aerith in assisting with his research, but comments that he strangely cannot locate her details in his database. I discussed in Part 3 of my Chapter 8 video trilogy how Professor Hojo is the director of the Research and Development Division, so it's very probable the reason Aerith is not in the database is because she has been deliberately omitted from it by the scientist, due to the secrecy of her Cetran heritage. Shortly after arriving at Wall Market, Cloud and Aerith see Johnny sprinting past them. Following him will bring the player to the Honeybee Inn, an adult establishment that has become iconic in Final Fantasy fandom. Johnny seems to be conflicted about whether or not to enter, just as he is in the original. When Cloud asks the redhead if he's seen Tifa around, Johnny declares his love for their mutual friend. However, he doesn't know who the ex-soldier is at this point in the remake. If you remember back to Chapter 3, he was blindfolded when Cloud and Tifa saved him from the Shinra goons, which is a significantly different introduction from that of the old game, where he knows from the get-go that the pair were childhood friends. Johnny's crush on the Star of Seventh Heaven is nothing new. He drops several hints before leaving Midgar in the original, but by the time his character is reinstated in the compilation during episode Denzel of the official novella On the Way to a Smile, his feelings have evolved. In the aftermath of Meteorfall, Johnny begins to think of Tifa as a source of inspiration, a role model, and names his own cafe on the outskirts of Edge, Johnny's Heaven, in honour of her bar. The Denzel chapter goes on to explain that Johnny spent so much time telling customers about Tifa, he began losing business to the new Seventh Heaven, that, as fate would have it, she co-owns with Cloud. In the alley behind the Honeybee Inn, we get our first glimpse of someone in the new design of the Honeybee outfit, and it's none other than Miss Folia, one of the teachers of the Sector 5 Leaf House. The mystery of the exciting evening plans she was running late for has now been uncovered. I wonder how much encouragement Jessie, herself a performer before joining Avalanche, gave Miss Folia, because we know she and Biggs often helped out at the Leaf House. And finally, after exploring Wall Market, the story is progressed by visiting the mansion of Don Cornell. It might not have been obvious to fans of the old game because of the overhead camera angle, but the building has always been styled on Wutai culture, with its pagodas and hip roofs, much as we see in the Colosseum and other structures. Within the walls of the mansion, Cloud and Aerith find 3 doormen guarding the main entrance. The silver-haired leader of the Triad is identified as Leslie, who suggests the intruders leave if they know what's good for them. He goes on to explain that to audition for a chance of being selected as Don Corneo's bride, a girl must be recommended by one of the trio, the foremost authorities on the Don's personal tastes. The trio consists of Chocobo Sam, who we met earlier, Madam M, and Andrea Rodea, the proprietor of the Honeybee Inn. The scenario of how Cloud and Aerith managed to get into the mansion is legendary among video games, and I will provide a detailed breakdown of it in the next episode. For now though, I'm going to round up by talking about Leslie himself. Leslie Kyle is one of the secondary protagonists in the official novel The Kids Are Alright, authored by Final Fantasy VII scenario writer Kazushige Nojima, which is set around 2 years after the original game, shortly before the events of Advent Children. He works for Mirie's investigative services alongside main characters Evan Townsend and Kyrie Kanan, the latter of whom I've referenced in previous episodes and who we'll meet again in due course. The book describes Leslie as smart, well-read and a bit of a wise-ass, but he can be dangerous when he needs to be, and principled too. The manner in which he subtly insists that Aerith does not pursue an audition is a prime example of the latter. Leslie's past as a henchman of Don Corneo is detailed a little bit in the novel, but the intricacies of his motives and actions are explored much further in the remake, as we'll find out in coming episodes. Well guys, this has been part 2 of my recap of the compilation lore and Easter eggs from Chapter 9 in the Final Fantasy VII Remake. I hope you've enjoyed it, and please be sure to leave a comment with any feedback or something you think I've missed. If you haven't already done so, I invite you to check out my own Patreon account, where you'll find free downloads of my unofficial novelisation of Final Fantasy VII, the Nibelheim Incident, and much more. Subscribers also get access to a huge amount of original content as well, including project artwork, behind the scenes podcasts, creator videos, etc. And be sure to look out for my new book, Norse Myths That Inspired Final Fantasy VII, which releases on October 13th. But until next time, take care. I'm MJ Gallagher, in association with KupoCon, and I'll speak to you again soon.